Widow accepted the rotten van as payment from her boss. But what was inside the engine? Rebecca Patterson held the broom tightly while her boss yelled on the phone about overdue bills. For 2 years she had worked at Mr. Howard's auto shop, always receiving her paycheck weeks late, always swallowing the humiliation in silence because she needed those few dollars to support her 3 young children. It was when Mr. Howard slammed the phone down hard and turned to her with that expression she knew well, the expression of someone who was about to deliver bad news. "Rebecca, sit down because I need to talk with you," he said, pointing to the broken chair next to the desk, covered with papers stained with oil. She stopped sweeping and sat down, her heart already racing. In recent weeks she had noticed the shop was emptier, with fewer cars to repair and less activity than usual. "Look, I won't be able to pay you this week," he began, avoiding her gaze. "Actually, I don't know when I'll be able to pay you again. Things are bad here." Rebecca felt the world spin. It had already been 3 weeks since she received her full salary, and now he was saying he didn't know when he could pay again. How would she explain to Brandon, Tyler, and Emily that they might not have food on the table the next day? "Mr. Howard, you can't do this to me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have 3 children to raise alone. You know my situation." I know, he replied, nervously shuffling the papers. "That's why I thought of a solution. Look, I can't pay you in cash, but I can give you something worth more than 3 months of your salary." Rebecca looked at him suspiciously. She had known Mr. Howard long enough to know that when he talked about a solution, it usually meant more problems for her. "What kind of solution?" she asked, crossing her arms. "There's a van out back in the yard. It's a bit rusty, needs some repairs, but it still runs. If you want, you can have it as payment for the last few weeks." Rebecca looked through the shop's dirty window and saw at the back of the lot a yellow van that looked more like it came from a junkyard. The roof was covered with a tarp hiding holes. The side had deep scratches and the peeling paint revealed rust everywhere. "Mr. Howard, I don't even know how to drive properly," she protested. "And by the looks of that van, it'll cause more problems than solutions." "Ah, but you can learn to drive, and I'll help you with the first repairs, no charge," he said, getting up from his chair as if the matter were settled. "It's this or nothing, Rebecca. You choose." She remained silent for a few minutes, mentally calculating her few options. She had no savings, no other guaranteed jobs, and with a van, at least she could try doing deliveries or transport to earn some money. "All right," she finally said, sighing deeply. "But you help me fix whatever is most urgent to get it running properly." "Deal," replied Mr. Howard, extending his grease-stained hand. "You can take it tomorrow." That night, Rebecca told her children about the van. Brandon, the eldest at 10 years old, was excited about the idea of having a family car. Tyler, 8 years old, wanted to know if he could paint drawings on the side. Emily, the youngest at 5 years old, just clapped because she saw her brothers happy. "Mom, will we be able to go for rides on Sundays?" asked Brandon, his eyes shining with anticipation. "We'll see, son," she replied, not wanting to create expectations she might not be able to fulfill. "First, I need to see if it works properly." The next morning, Mr. Howard waited for her beside the van with a set of keys in his hand. Up close, the vehicle looked even worse than she had imagined. The yellow paint was so faded it looked more like beige, and there were welding patches on several parts of the body. "She's got a few little engine issues," he said, handing over the keys, "but nothing a few adjustments can't fix. The important thing is she starts and runs." Rebecca turned the key in the ignition, and the engine coughed a few times before starting. The noise was loud and uneven, but at least it worked. She drove slowly to her house a few blocks away, with the neighbors watching curiously from their windows. When she got home, her 3 children ran to see the vehicle up close. Brandon climbed onto the hood, Tyler opened all the doors to explore the inside, and Emily stood admiring the bald tires as if they were the most beautiful wheels in the world. "Brandon, get down from there," said Rebecca. "That hood might be fragile." "Mom, there's a weird noise here in the engine," said the boy, still on the hood. Rebecca approached and indeed heard a different noise, as if something was loose inside the engine compartment. She opened the hood and began examining the rusty parts, trying to identify the source of the sound. "Brandon, help me clean this," she asked, grabbing an old cloth. "Let's see if we can figure out what's making that noise." They spent the whole afternoon cleaning the engine, removing dry leaves, old oil residue, and accumulated dirt. That's when Brandon noticed something strange between two engine parts. "Mum, look here," he said, pointing to a small metal box that was welded between the engine block and the radiator. "Is that normal?" Rebecca leaned in to get a better look. The box was small, about the size of a child's shoebox, and was very securely fastened, as if someone had gone to great lengths to hide it there. "That's not part of the engine," she said, feeling a chill in her stomach. "Someone put that there on purpose." Brandon tried to move the box, but it was welded so firmly it didn't budge a millimeter. "Can we take it out?" asked the boy. "I don't know," replied Rebecca, growing more suspicious by the minute. "Let's leave it as it is for now." But curiosity was greater than caution. She went to the kitchen to get some basic tools and returned to try to loosen the box. After half an hour of attempts, she only managed to scratch the metal with no real progress. "What are you guys doing?" asked Tyler, appearing beside them with Emily in his arms. "There's a hidden box here in the engine," explained Brandon. "Mom's trying to open it." Tyler came closer and examined the box with typical childlike curiosity. "Looks like a small safe," he said. "Do you think there's treasure?" "I don't know, son," replied Rebecca, but a worrying thought began to form in her mind. It could be anything. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, after putting the children to bed, Rebecca kept thinking about the mysterious box. Why would someone hide something inside a van's engine? And why was Mr. Howard so eager to get rid of the vehicle? She remembered the conversations she overheard at the shop, fragments of discussions Mr. Howard had on the phone when he thought she wasn't paying attention. He talked about special merchandise and discreet transport in a tone that always made her uncomfortable. The next morning she decided to look for Mr. Walter, a retired mechanic who lived 3 houses down. He had been a friend of her late husband and always seemed willing to help. "Mr. Walter, could you take a look at the van I got?" she asked, knocking on the door of the Simple house. "Of course, Rebecca," replied the grey-haired man, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Let's see what old junk Howard pushed off on you." They walked over to the van, and Mr. Walter began a detailed inspection. When they reached the engine, Rebecca pointed to the welded box. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" she asked. Mr. Walter observed the box for a few minutes, his expression growing increasingly serious. "This isn't normal, no," he finally said. "Someone welded this really well. It wasn't amateur work." "Can you remove it?" "I can, but it'll take some work," he replied, still examining the weld. "And honestly, Rebecca, if I were you, I'd think twice before opening that." "Why?" "Because whoever hid something so well doesn't want it found, and when people discover you found it, it could cause trouble," explained Mr. Walter, closing the hood. "Are you sure you want to know what's inside?" Rebecca fell silent, weighing the mechanic's words. Part of her wanted to ignore the box and move on, but another part couldn't forget that perhaps it could solve her financial problems. "Let me think about it a bit more," she said. "For now, don't mention this to anyone, okay?" "Don't worry," agreed Mr. Walter, "but if anything comes up, you come find me." 2 days later, Rebecca was washing clothes in the backyard when she saw Mr. Howard standing in front of her house. He was looking at the van with a strange expression, as if searching for something. She hid behind the clothesline and kept watching. Mr. Howard walked around the vehicle, looked through the windows, and even opened the hood for a few seconds. Then he closed everything and left, but not before glancing at the house as if to make sure no one was watching. "How strange," she murmured to herself. That afternoon, when the children returned from school, Brandon came running to her with intriguing news. "Mom, Mr. Howard came to the school today," said the boy, dropping his backpack on the floor. "To the school? Why?" "He was asking Mrs. Margaret if you had said anything about the van," explained Brandon. "Mrs. Margaret thought it was odd and told him to speak directly with you." Rebecca felt a tightness in her chest. Why was Mr. Howard asking questions about the van? And why did he seem so nervous? Did he say anything else? He said he forgot some important documents in the van and wanted to know if you had found them, continued Brandon. But Mrs. Margaret said that was your business, not the school's. That night, after checking several times that all the doors were locked, Rebecca decided she needed to find out what was in that box. Curiosity and suspicion were stronger than fear. She waited until the children were asleep and slipped out quietly to examine the van again. With a flashlight in hand, she opened the hood and stared at the mysterious box. Under the artificial light, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There were small numbers engraved on one side of the box. She wrote the numbers down on a piece of paper and returned home, but couldn't sleep. She spent the night thinking about what those numbers could mean and why Mr. Howard was so interested in the van. The next morning, a discovery left her even more alarmed. She found tool marks around the van's hood, as if someone had tried to force it open during the night. Someone tried to tamper with the van, she told Mr. Walter, who had come to visit at her request. How do you know? There are screwdriver marks here, look, she showed him, and I left the hood locked last night. Mr. Walter examined the marks and shook his head worriedly. Rebecca, this is getting dangerous, he said. Whatever is in that box, someone is very interested in it. What do you think I should do? I think you should take the van somewhere else, he suggested. Leave it at a relative's house until you decide what to do. Rebecca thought about the suggestion. The only option was the house of Mrs. Dorothy, her mother-in-law, who lived on the other side of town. Mrs. Dorothy had never really liked her, always thinking she wasn't good enough for her son, but perhaps, given the situation, she would agree to help. That afternoon, she drove to Mrs. Dorothy's house, a 65-year-old woman who kept her home spotless and had an opinion about everything. Rebecca, what a surprise, said Mrs. Dorothy, opening the door with a forced smile. What's that van out front? It's my car now, Mrs. Dorothy, explained Rebecca. I need a favor from you. Mrs. Dorothy invited her in and served coffee while Rebecca explained the situation, omitting only the details about the mysterious box. So you want to leave that old tin can in my backyard? Asked the mother-in-law, with her usual critical tone. It's just for a few days until I sort out some problems, pleaded Rebecca. I promise it won't be a bother. Mrs. Dorothy was silent for a few minutes, clearly weighing the situation. All right, she finally said, but only for a week. After that you find another place. Thank you, Mrs. Dorothy, said Rebecca, relieved. She drove the van into her mother-in-law's backyard and parked it behind the house, partially hidden by a large mango tree. In the following days, Rebecca tried to maintain a normal routine, looking for other jobs and taking care of the children, but the peace didn't last long. On Wednesday, Mrs. Helen, Mrs. Dorothy's neighbor, approached Rebecca as she was picking up the children from school. Rebecca, I need to talk to you, said the woman, clearly agitated. What is it, Mrs. Helen? Yesterday, a man showed up at your mother-in-law's house asking about a yellow van, she recounted. He said you had something that belonged to him and offered money for information. Rebecca's heart raced. Did you see who it was? It was Mr. Howard from the auto shop, replied Mrs. Helen. He was very nervous, offered 50 rays just to know if the van was there. And did Mrs. Dorothy say anything? No, she sent him away, said Mrs. Helen. But I'm worried. What's this about you having something of his? Rebecca made up an excuse about lost documents and quickly said goodbye. She needed to talk to Mrs. Dorothy immediately. When she arrived at her mother-in-law's house, she found the woman watering the plants with an irritated expression. Mrs. Dorothy, Mrs. Helen told me that Mr. Howard came here, said Rebecca. He did? And what a rude man, replied the mother-in-law without stopping her watering. Came here offering money like I was some nobody. What exactly did he say? He said you had taken something that was his by mistake, and that he was willing to pay well to get it back, recounted Mrs. Dorothy, finally stopping to look at her daughter-in-law. Rebecca, you're not mixed up in anything wrong, are you? Of course not, Mrs. Dorothy, she replied, though she was no longer so sure about what was happening. Then why is that man offering money, insisted the mother-in-law, and why are you hiding that van here? Rebecca realized she couldn't hide the truth from Mrs. Dorothy any longer. If she was going to ask for help, she needed to be honest. Mrs. Dorothy, there's a box hidden in the van, she confessed. I don't know what's inside, but Mr. Howard is very interested in it. What kind of box? A small metal box welded to the engine, explained Rebecca. And from the way Mr. Howard is acting, there must be something important inside. Mrs. Dorothy grew serious and crossed her arms. Did you open that box? Not yet, replied Rebecca. I'm afraid of what I might find. And you're right to be afraid, said the mother-in-law. If that man is offering money, it's either something very valuable or something that could cause trouble. That night, the two women talked late into the evening, trying to decide what to do. Dorothy, despite her constant criticisms, showed a practical wisdom that Rebecca didn't expect. Rebecca, you have two options, said her mother-in-law. Either you return that van to Mr. Howard and pretend you saw nothing, or you find out what's in that box and face the consequences. What do you think I should do? It depends, replied Mrs. Dorothy, pouring more coffee. Do you trust Mr. Howard? No, said Rebecca without hesitation. Then you already have your answer, concluded her mother-in-law. A man who's no good doesn't change because you do him favors. The next morning, Rebecca decided to look for a locksmith downtown to open the box. She chose someone she didn't know and who had no connection to Mr. Howard. Mr. Frank, the locksmith, was a middle-aged man who worked in a small shop downtown. When Rebecca explained that she needed to open a welded box, he didn't ask any nosy questions. I'll need to use a saw and a blowtorch, he explained. It'll take some work, but I can open it without destroying what's inside. How much do you charge? 30 rees, said Mr. Frank. And you stay here watching me work. Rebecca drove the van to the shop and grew nervous as Mr. Frank worked. Each cut of the saw revealed more of the box's inner metal, increasing her anxiety about what they would find. After 2 hours of careful work, the box finally opened. Inside were several bundles of yellowed papers, some sealed envelopes, and a small golden key attached to a cord. Wow, murmured Mr. Frank. Looks like important stuff. Rebecca picked up the papers with trembling hands. They were invoices, receipts, and contracts she didn't fully understand, but that looked official. There were names of car parts, high amounts, and signatures she recognized as Mr. Howard's. Do you know about mechanics? She asked Mr. Frank. I know a bit, he replied, wiping his hands. Why? Can you take a look at these papers and tell me what they mean? Mr. Frank examined some documents and his expression turned serious. These are invoices for expensive parts, he said. Engine, transmission, original parts. Look at these amounts here. Rebecca saw numbers reaching thousands of reais. What's wrong? These parts here are being sold as new, but look at this small note down here, pointed out Mr. Frank. It says, reconditioned. That means they're used parts. And is that a problem? It depends, he explained. If the customer is paying for new parts and getting used ones, they're being cheated. And by these amounts, they're being cheated a lot. Rebecca felt a chill in her stomach. Those papers were evidence that Mr. Howard was cheating customers, selling used parts as if they were new. And this key? She asked, showing the small golden key. Looks like a safe or locker key, said Mr. Frank. It must open someplace where there's more stuff related to this. Rebecca paid for the service, stored everything in a bag, and drove back home, her mind buzzing with discoveries. Now she understood why Mr. Howard was so interested in the van. Those papers could ruin his reputation and even get him into serious trouble. But what to do with this information? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When she got home, she found Brandon playing in the backyard with his siblings. The boy came running to her with a worried expression. Mom, Mr. Howard came by again, said Brandon. He was asking where you had parked the van. Did you say anything? No, just like you taught me, replied the boy, but he said he'd be back to talk to you. Rebecca felt the situation was getting more and more tense. She decided to seek legal help to better understand what she had in her hands. In the city center, there was a law office that served low-income people. She scheduled an appointment with attorney Michael, a young lawyer who specialized in cases involving working-class individuals. "So, Mrs. Rebecca," said Attorney Michael after examining the documents, "what you have here is evidence of commercial fraud." "Is that serious?" "Very serious," he confirmed. "If these documents are genuine, and from what I see here they appear to be, your former boss was systematically deceiving customers." Attorney Michael explained that the invoices showed a pattern of selling used parts at new prices, overcharging for services, and even charging for services that were never performed. "What can I do with this?" asked Rebecca. "You have a few options," said the lawyer. "You can hand everything over to the proper authorities. You can try to negotiate with him, or you can simply return everything and pretend you saw nothing." "What would be the best option?" "It depends on what you want to achieve," explained Attorney Michael. "If you want justice for the harmed customers, hand everything over to the authorities. If you want to resolve your own situation, you can try to negotiate." Rebecca took the documents back home, still undecided about what to do. That night, she had a long conversation with Mrs. Dorothy about the options. "Rebecca, let me tell you something," said her mother-in-law, serving tea. "A few months ago, I took my old car to Mr. Howard's shop for repairs. And what happened? He charged me $400 to replace some parts," recounted Mrs. Dorothy. "Afterward, the car still had the same problem. When I complained, he said he had to replace more parts." "Did you get the second service done?" "No, I didn't," replied her mother-in-law. "I took it to another mechanic who found that the parts Mr. Howard said he replaced were still the original ones, old and worn out." "So you were cheated too?" "Yes, I was," confirmed Mrs. Dorothy, "and at the time, there was no way to prove anything." This revelation changed Rebecca's perspective on the situation. It wasn't just about uncovering secrets. It was a matter of justice. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you know other people who were cheated by him?" "I know several," said her mother-in-law. "Mrs. Florence from the corner, Mr. Henry from the grocery store, Tyler Williams's family. Everyone has a story to tell about that shop." "Why has no one ever done anything?" "Because it's hard to prove," explained Mrs. Dorothy, "and because we're ordinary folks, we don't have money for expensive lawyers." That night, Rebecca made a decision. She would use those documents not for revenge, but to get justice for all the people who had been deceived. The next morning she began looking for the victims Mrs. Dorothy had mentioned. The first was Mrs. Florence, a 70-year-old woman who lived alone 3 houses down from the corner. "Mrs. Florence, do you remember the problem you had at Mr. Howard's shop?" "Oh, do I remember?" replied the woman, inviting Rebecca inside. "That man shamelessly robbed me." Mrs. Florence recounted that she had taken her car in for an oil change, and Mr. Howard told her the engine had serious issues. He charged $800 for urgent repairs that, according to him, would prevent major damage. "I paid because I got scared," she said. "But later I found out he didn't even touch the engine. He just changed the oil and kept my money." "Do you have the papers from that service?" "Yes, I do," answered Mrs. Florence, going to fetch them from a drawer. "I kept everything, but I never knew what to do." Rebecca examined the documents and saw that they matched the pattern she had discovered in the box. Same handwriting, same type of overcharging. "Mrs. Florence, what if I told you we might be able to get this money back?" "How so?" Rebecca vaguely explained about the documents she had found, without going into details about how she obtained them. "Do you really think it's possible?" asked Mrs. Florence, with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "I think so," replied Rebecca, "but I'll need your help." In the following days, Rebecca sought out other victims. Mr. Henry, from the corner store, had lost 1,200 reais on a service that was never completed. Tyler Williams' family had been charged twice for the same service. Each story was similar: simple, hard-working people who had trusted Mr. Howard and were systematically deceived. "We need to get organized," said Rebecca during a meeting at Mrs. Dorothy's house. "Alone, no one can do anything against him, but together we can make a difference." "But how?" asked Mr. Henry. "He'll deny everything." "Not if I have proof of what he did," replied Rebecca, showing some of the documents she had found. The group examined the papers and was surprised by the level of detail in the frauds. "This is gold," said Tyler Williams. "With this evidence, he can't deny it." "But we need to be careful," warned Rebecca. He's already suspicious that I have something. It was then that Mrs. Dorothy had a practical idea. Why don't we confront him directly, she suggested. Call him for a talk and lay our cards on the table. That could be dangerous, said Mr. Henry. It could be, agreed Mrs. Dorothy. But it might also be our only chance to resolve this without involving other people. The group decided that Rebecca would make the first contact with Mr. Howard. She would call him saying she wanted to return something she had found in the van, setting up a public meeting to discuss the situation. Rebecca called the auto shop the next morning. Mr. Howard, it's Rebecca. I need to talk to you about the van. Rebecca, he said with exaggerated enthusiasm, I'm glad you called. I was actually wanting to talk to you. I found something I think is yours, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. What? The anxiety in his voice was evident. I'd rather talk in person, she replied. Can you meet me at the town square today at 3? Yes, I can, he answered quickly. Can you bring that thing you found? I can, said Rebecca, hanging up the phone. The rest of the group would position themselves around the square, watching the conversation from a distance. If anything went wrong, they would be nearby to help. At 3 in the afternoon, Rebecca was sitting on a bench in the square when she saw Mr. Howard arriving. He looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting an ambush. Rebecca, he said, sitting beside her, did you bring it? Yes, I did, she replied, showing a folder with some of the documents. But first, I want to understand something. What? Why was this thing hidden in the van? Mr. Howard remained silent for a few seconds, clearly calculating his response. They were some important papers I stored there and forgot, he said finally. Important papers of what? Auto shop documents, old invoices, he replied, reaching out his hand. Can you give them back? Yes, I can, said Rebecca, but didn't hand over the folder. But first I want to ask a question. Do you think it's right to sell used parts as if they were new? Mr. Howard's expression changed completely. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the documents I found, she said, opening the folder. I'm talking about how you've been deceiving your customers for years. Mr. Howard tried to grab the folder, but Rebecca pulled it away. Calm down, she said. Let's talk like civilized people. Rebecca, you don't understand the situation, he said, with a mix of nervousness and irritation. That's none of your business. It became my business when I found out my late husband was on the list of those cheated, she replied, showing one of the documents. That was the revelation that changed everything. On the list of deceived customers, Rebecca had found the name of Daniel, her husband, who had taken the car to the auto shop just a few months before he passed away. Daniel never told me he had a problem at your shop, she continued, but it says here that you charged him for replacing the entire engine when you only cleaned the parts. Mr. Howard paled. Rebecca, I can explain. No need to explain, she interrupted. You need to fix the mistake. What do you mean? Simple, said Rebecca, finally revealing her true proposal. You're going to return the money you stole from everyone. That's impossible, protested Mr. Howard. I don't have the money for that. Then we'll have to resolve this another way, she said, standing up. What other way? By taking these papers to someone who understands the matter, replied Rebecca, putting the folder away. Mr. Howard grabbed her by the arm. Wait, he said, desperation in his voice. Let's negotiate. Now you want to negotiate? She asked. When you were humiliating me every day at the auto shop, you didn't want to negotiate. Rebecca, please, he begged. If these papers end up in the hands of the authorities, I'll lose everything. And the money you stole from people. Didn't they lose anything? It was at that moment that Mrs. Dorothy approached, along with other members of the group. Good afternoon, Howard, said Rebecca's mother-in-law with an icy smile. Mrs. Dorothy? He looked around and saw Mr. Henry, Tyler Williams, and Mrs. Florence also approaching. What's going on here? We're all here because we were all deceived by you, explained Mrs. Dorothy, and now we want our money back. Mr. Howard realized he was surrounded by all the people he had wronged over the years. The expression on his face was one of total panic. Folks, let's talk, he said, trying to stay calm. I'm sure we can resolve this. Yes, we will, agreed Rebecca. But now the rules have changed. The group headed to Mrs. Dorothy's house, where they could talk with more privacy. Mr. Howard followed them, clearly with no choice. At her mother-in-law's house, Rebecca spread the documents on the living room table, showing Mr. Howard the full extent of the evidence she had. "Look here, Howard," she said. "There's a fake invoice, a receipt for a service not done, a double charge. It's all documented." Mr. Howard examined the papers and realized there was no way out. Those documents proved all the frauds he had committed. "How much do you want?" he asked, defeated. "We want our money back," replied Mrs. Florence, "every cent. And if I don't have all the money? Then you'll have to figure it out," said Mr. Henry. "How?" That's when Mrs. Dorothy made a proposal no one expected. "Howard, you have two options," she said. "Either you pay everyone back at once or you work to pay it off." "What do you mean, work to pay it off?" "You keep the auto shop, but now you work honestly," explained Mrs. Dorothy. "And every week you pay a portion of what you owe until it's all settled." "But I'll have nothing left for myself," he protested. "You should have thought of that before stealing from others," Rebecca replied. "And how will you make sure I don't run away or hide money?" "Because we'll be watching," said Tyler Williams, "and because if you try anything, these papers go straight to the police." Mr. Howard stayed silent for several minutes, clearly weighing his options. He knew he had no real choice. "All right," he said finally, "I accept your proposal." "But there are conditions," added Rebecca. "What conditions?" "First, you're going to make a list of everyone you've deceived and how much you owe each one," she explained. "Second, you'll work under the supervision of someone we choose. Third, any service you perform from now on will come with a warranty and will be inspected. And fourth," added Mrs. Dorothy, "you'll apologize to every person you've harmed." Mr. Howard nodded his head, defeated but relieved not to lose everything. "And the little golden key?" asked Rebecca, showing the key she had found in the box. "It opens a small safe I have hidden in the auto shop office," he admitted. "There are more documents there and some money saved." "Let's go get it," she said. The group headed to the auto shop, where Mr. Howard opened the safe hidden behind a cabinet. Inside were more incriminating documents and about 2,000 reais in cash. "This money will be the first payment," Rebecca determined. "But I need this money to keep the auto shop running," he protested. "You should have thought of that before," replied Mrs. Dorothy without mercy. In the following days, the group organized a supervision system for the auto shop. Mr. Walter, the retired mechanic friend of Rebecca, agreed to oversee Mr. Howard's work, ensuring all services were done honestly. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, and other victims began to appear. The list of deceived people was much larger than they had imagined. "My God," said Rebecca when she saw the final list. "It's more than 20 families." "And the total damage?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "It's over 15,000 reais," replied Tyler Williams, who had helped add up all the amounts. Mr. Howard turned pale when he learned the total sum. 15,000 reais. "That will take years to pay off," he said. "Then you'd better start working right," answered Rebecca. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, the system worked better than anyone expected. With Mr. Walter supervising, Mr. Howard began working honestly for the first time in years. The services were cheaper for customers but done correctly and with a real warranty. Rebecca used the restored van to create a small school transport business. With some basic repairs done honestly at the auto shop, the vehicle became reliable and safe. "Mom, the van is looking nice," said Brandon, helping her clean the interior. "It really did," she agreed, observing how the vehicle had transformed. "Who would have thought that old Heap would change our lives like this?" "And how did it change?" asked Tyler, curious. "It taught us that sometimes treasures come hidden in the most unexpected places," explained Rebecca. "But the real treasure wasn't what was in the box. What was it then?" "It was discovering that when people come together for a just cause, they can change things," she said, running her hand through her son's hair. Mrs. Dorothy, who had become an unlikely ally, developed a completely new relationship with her daughter-in-law. The constant criticism gave way to mutual respect. "Rebecca," her mother-in-law said one afternoon while they had coffee, "I owe you an apology." "Why, Mrs. Dorothy?" "For having doubted you so many times," she admitted. "You showed a courage I didn't know existed." "You were courageous too," replied Rebecca. "If it weren't for your idea to make him work to pay it off, we never would have reached such a good solution." Over the months, Mr. Howard's auto shop became known in the area for its honesty. Old customers who had been deceived returned, now trusting the supervised work. New customers came through recommendations from satisfied people. "I never imagined that working honestly could be so satisfying," admitted Mr. Howard during one of the weekly accountability meetings. "It's because before you were always afraid of being caught," explained Mr. Walter. "Now you can sleep in peace." "That's true," he agreed, "and customers treat us differently when they trust our work." Mr. Howard's transformation was gradual but real. He began to understand that he had wasted years living in fear and anxiety, always trying to hide his frauds. Working honestly, even earning less, brought a peace he had forgotten existed. Rebecca Patterson expanded her transportation business, securing some fixed contracts with local schools. The van, now painted light blue and always clean, became a familiar presence in the neighborhood streets. "Look, Mom," said Emily, pointing out the window. Aunt Helen waved at our van. "It's because now everyone knows our van," explained Brandon, proud. "And because Mom helped so many people," added Tyler. Rebecca's reputation in the neighborhood had completely changed. From a woman pitied for being a poor widow, she became respected as someone who had faced an unfair situation and found a solution that benefited the whole community. One afternoon, 2 years after the discovery of the mysterious box, Rebecca received an unexpected visit. It was Mrs. Helen, Mrs. Dorothy's neighbor, accompanied by a woman she didn't know. "Rebecca, this is Jennifer," introduced Mrs. Helen. "She has a problem similar to what you solved." Jennifer explained that she had discovered her husband, owner of a small building supply store, was selling second-rate materials as if they were top quality, harming customers building their homes on a limited budget. "I found some papers that prove this," said Jennifer, "but I don't know what to do. If I report him, he loses everything and my children are left with nothing. If I stay quiet, he keeps cheating poor people." Rebecca listened to the story carefully, remembering her own dilemmas 2 years earlier. "Jennifer, have you tried talking to him about this?" "I did," she replied. "But he said that's how business works, that everyone does it." "And do you believe that?" "No," said Jennifer firmly. "I know it's wrong, but I also know he's not a bad man. I think he lost his way." Rebecca shared her experience, explaining how she had found a solution that punished the wrongdoing but preserved the possibility of redemption. "The important thing is that he understands he needs to change," she said, "and that the people who were harmed are compensated." "Do you think my case has a solution?" "I think every case has a solution when we truly want to resolve it," answered Rebecca. "But you'll need courage and you'll need help from the people who were harmed." Jennifer decided to follow Rebecca's example. With her help, and Mrs. Dorothy's, she organized a group of affected customers and confronted her husband with the evidence. The process was similar, but each case had its particularities. Jennifer's husband initially denied everything, then tried to justify it, and finally accepted a compensation agreement when he realized his wife was determined to take the case forward with or without his cooperation. "Rebecca," said Jennifer a few months later, "I don't know how to thank you. My husband is working honestly now, our customers trust the store, and I sleep in peace knowing we're not accomplices to anything wrong." These cases began to multiply. Rebecca's story spread beyond the neighborhood, and people from other areas started seeking her out for advice on how to handle similar situations. "Mom, you've become famous," joked Brandon, who was now 12. "I haven't become famous," she corrected him. "I just found out that many people go through the same problems and need support." Mrs. Dorothy suggested that Rebecca formalize this activity. "Why don't you create an official group to help people in these situations?" "I don't know if I'm qualified for that," said Rebecca. "Yes, you are," insisted her mother-in-law. "You have the experience of someone who went through it and found a way out, and you have the sensitivity to understand that punishment isn't always the best solution." With the support of attorney Michael, the lawyer who had initially helped her, Rebecca created an informal support group that met weekly at the neighborhood church. The goal was to help people who discovered irregularities in their families or communities find solutions that preserved relationships when possible. "Will the group be called Second Chance?" asked Attorney Michael, helping with the paperwork. "No," replied Rebecca. "It will be Justice and Forgiveness, because you need both." The group grew quickly. Within 6 months, it had already helped more than 15 families resolve conflicts involving dishonesty, always seeking solutions that punished the mistakes but offered an opportunity for redemption. Mr. Howard, who had paid off all his debts with the deceived customers, became one of the group's volunteers, sharing his experience as someone who had made mistakes and managed to redeem himself. "I know what it's like to be on the other side," he said during one of the meetings. "I know the feeling of being cornered and thinking there's no way out, and I also know how liberating it is when you accept that you made a mistake and commit to making it right." Rebecca's blue van became a symbol in the neighborhood. The children waved when she passed by, the adults greeted her with respect, and some people even stopped the vehicle to thank her for the work she was doing. "Mom," said Emily, now 7 years old, "when I grow up I want to help people like you do. And I want to have an honest auto shop like Mr. Howard's now," said Tyler. "And I want to drive the van when you get old," joked Brandon. Rebecca smiled, realizing that her children had learned from that experience values they would carry for the rest of their lives. One morning, 5 years after finding the mysterious box, Rebecca was organizing papers at home when Brandon brought a letter that had arrived in the mail. "Mom," an official letter came, he said, handing her the envelope. The letter was from City Hall, informing Rebecca that she had been nominated to receive an honor for services rendered to the community. "What is this?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, who was visiting. "It seems they're going to give me an honor," said Rebecca, still surprised. "And you deserve it," said her mother-in-law. "You changed this neighborhood." "It wasn't just me," corrected Rebecca. "It was everyone together." "But you're the one who started it," insisted Mrs. Dorothy. "You're the one who had the courage to open that box." The honor ceremony was held at the city council, with the presence of many people who had been helped by Rebecca and her group. Mr. Howard was there, along with Jennifer and her husband, Attorney Michael, and many others. During her speech, Rebecca recalled how it all began. "5 years ago, I was just a desperate widow who accepted an old van because I had no other choice," she told the audience. "I never imagined that decision would change not only my life, but the lives of so many people. The van was in terrible condition, but there was something valuable hidden in it. It wasn't gold or money. It was the opportunity to do the right thing, even when it would have been easier to do the wrong thing. I learned that justice doesn't have to be revenge. I learned that forgiveness doesn't have to be weakness. And I learned that when people come together for a just cause, they can transform an entire community. Today, our community is different. We have more honest businesses, more genuine relationships, and children growing up with solid values. And it all started with a rusty van and a mysterious box." After the ceremony, the group gathered at Mrs. Dorothy's house for a celebration. The blue van was parked in front of the house, clean and shiny, very different from that yellow, rusty van that had arrived there years before. "You know what amazes me most about this story," said Attorney Michael, observing the vehicle. "What?" "It's that the van was truly a meager payment at first," he said, "but it became the best payment you could have received." "Why?" "Because it gave you independence, it gave you a livelihood, and it gave you the chance to discover who you really were," explained the attorney. Rebecca looked at the van and then at her children, who were playing in the yard with other kids. "Brandon," she called, "do you remember when you found that box in the engine?" "Yes, I remember," replied the boy, now 15 and almost as tall as his mother. "Did you imagine it would lead to all this?" Brandon looked around, seeing the family gathered, the friends they had made, the community that had transformed. "No, Mom," he said, smiling. "I thought there would be treasure. I didn't know that we would be the treasure." Rebecca hugged her son, moved by the wisdom he showed. "That's right, son," she said. "Sometimes the treasure isn't what we find. It's what we become while searching." That night, after everyone had left, Rebecca went out to look at the van under the moonlight. She ran her hand over the blue body, remembering how it all began. Mr. Howard appeared beside her, also contemplating the vehicle. "Rebecca," he said, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you regret opening that box?" She thought for a moment. "No," she finally replied. "And you? Do you regret hiding it?" Mr. Howard was silent for a few seconds. "I regret doing the things that led me to hide it," he said. "But I don't regret that you found it. It was the best thing that could have happened to everyone." "Why?" "Because it forced me to become a better person," he admitted. "And because it showed that it's possible to start over, even after making big mistakes." They stayed there for a few more minutes, in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "Mr. Howard," Rebecca finally said. "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me this van." He looked at her, surprised. "Even after everything that happened?" "Especially because of everything that happened," she replied. "This van changed my life in a way I never imagined possible." "And it changed mine too," he said, "in a way I didn't know I needed." A few years later, when Emily turned 10, the family organized a party in Mrs. Dorothy's backyard. The blue van was decorated with colorful balloons, and several families from the neighborhood joined the celebration. "Mom," said Emily, running up to Rebecca, "Mrs. Florence brought a story to tell." Mrs. Florence, now 75 but still very active, had become the group's official storyteller of sorts. "Which story, Mrs. Florence?" asked Rebecca. "The story of the mysterious van and the brave woman," replied the lady with a twinkle in her eye. "Oh, no," protested Rebecca, embarrassed. "The kids already know that story." "But we like hearing it again," said Brandon. "Every time Mrs. Florence tells it, we discover a new detail." "It's true," agreed Tyler. "Last time she told about how you got nervous before opening the box. And the time before that, she talked about how Mr. Howard was scared," added Emily. Mrs. Florence began telling the story to the children present, many of whom hadn't been born when it all happened. She described the rusty van, the mysterious box, the discovery of the documents, and how an entire community came together to solve a problem fairly. "And do you know what the most important part of the story was?" asked Mrs. Florence to the children. "What?" they replied in unison. "It was when Mrs. Rebecca decided not to use the documents to get revenge," she explained. "It would have been easy to hand everything over to the police and watch Mr. Howard get into trouble, but she chose the harder path, the one that gave everyone a chance to come out ahead." "Why was that important?" asked one of the children. "Because revenge only breeds more revenge," answered Mrs. Florence. "But justice with forgiveness brings transformation." Mr. Howard, who was listening to the story from across the yard, approached the children. "And you know what else?" he said. "Mrs. Rebecca taught me that being honest is much easier than being dishonest." "How so?" asked a child. "When you're dishonest, you always have to make up lies to hide the first lie," he explained. "You live in fear of being found out, you can't sleep well, you can't look people in the eye. It's a very tiring life." "And now?" asked another child. "Now I work peacefully," said Mr. Howard. "I sleep in peace, I look at my customers without shame, and my children are proud of their father." Attorney Michael, who was also at the party, took the opportunity to add a legal perspective to the conversation. "Children," he said, "your van story is special because it shows that the law isn't always enough to solve problems. Sometimes you need to find creative solutions that the law doesn't provide for." "How so?" asked Brandon. "The law would say that Mr. Howard should be arrested or fined," explained Attorney Michael. "But that wouldn't solve the problem for the people who were cheated. The solution you found was better than the law." "So you invented a new law?" asked Emily, curious. "In a way, yes," replied the attorney. "You invented a community law based on justice and forgiveness." Mrs. Dorothy, who was serving soda to the children, stopped to listen to the conversation. "You know what makes me proudest about this story?" she said. "What, Grandma Dorothy?" asked Emily, who had adopted her mother's mother-in-law as a grandmother. "It's that you proved that ordinary people can solve big problems," answered Mrs. Dorothy. "You didn't need politicians. You didn't need important people. You just needed courage and goodwill." "And unity," added Mr. Henry, who was also at the party. "If everyone had tried to solve it alone, nothing would have worked out. Jennifer, who was now one of the coordinators of the Justice and Forgiveness group, took the opportunity to talk about more recent cases they had resolved. "Last week we helped a family that discovered their son was selling counterfeit products online," she told them. "We applied the same principle. Fix the mistake, compensate those who were harmed, and give a chance to start over." "And did it work?" asked Tyler. "Yes, it did," replied Jennifer. "The young man is now working honestly to pay back the customers who were cheated, and he's learning about ethical business. And there's another interesting case," added Attorney Michael, "a teacher who was selling grades to students." "And how did you resolve it?" asked Brandon, interested. "The teacher had to return the money he received for the fake grades, take a course on professional ethics, and now works as a volunteer giving free tutoring," explained the attorney. "And the students who bought the grades? They had to retake the tests and do community service," answered Attorney Michael. "But they weren't expelled from school." "Once again, justice with a second chance," observed Mrs. Florence. Rebecca, listening to all these stories, realized how that small discovery in the van had multiplied and spread, creating a network of transformation that went far beyond what she had ever imagined. "Do you know what the biggest lesson I learned from all this was?" she asked the group. Everyone fell silent, waiting for the answer. "I learned that life's toughest problems don't have ready-made solutions," she said, "but they always have possible solutions when we're willing to search with patience and creativity. And with help from friends," added Brandon. "And with courage to do the right thing," completed Tyler. "And with love to forgive when needed," finished Emily. The party continued late into the night with music, dancing, and many stories. When everyone had finally left, the family was alone cleaning the backyard. "Mom," said Brandon, putting away the chairs, "have you ever thought about writing a book about our story?" "Why?" "Because maybe other people in other places are going through the same problems and need to know it's possible to solve them," he explained. "That's a good idea," agreed Mrs. Dorothy. "The van story could inspire many people." Rebecca thought about the suggestion while putting away the last party items. Maybe Brandon was right. Maybe there were people in other towns, other states, going through similar situations and needing to know there were alternatives beyond revenge or inaction. A few weeks later, she approached Attorney Michael to discuss the book idea. "I think it's excellent," said the attorney, "but I suggest it be more than a book. How about we create a practical manual for people who discover irregularities in their communities?" "How so?" "A step-by-step guide on how to organize community groups, how to document problems, how to negotiate solutions, how to create oversight systems," explained Attorney Michael, "based on your experience but adaptable for different situations." The idea evolved quickly. With help from Jennifer, Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Howard, and other group members, they began documenting all the cases they had resolved, creating a kind of methodology for justice and forgiveness. The manual was published a year later, titled The Van of Second Chances: How to Turn Problems into Opportunities for Change. The book spread quickly, especially in small communities where problems were similar to those they had faced. Rebecca began receiving letters from people across the country, telling how they had applied the book's principles in their own situations. "Mom, another letter arrived," said Emily, now 12 years old, handing over an envelope. The letter was from a woman in North Carolina who had discovered her husband was embezzling money from an agricultural cooperative. Following the steps described in the book, she managed to organize the affected cooperative members and find a solution that preserved both the family and the cooperative. "Look at this," Rebecca said to Mrs. Dorothy. "This woman managed to solve a problem much bigger than ours." "That's what's beautiful," replied her mother-in-law. "The seed you planted is bearing fruit in distant soil." 5 years after the book's publication, Rebecca was invited to participate in a national television program about community initiatives. The production wanted to tell the story of the van and how it had transformed into a social change movement. "Mom, you're going to be on TV!" exclaimed Tyler, now 15 years old. "It's not about me," corrected Rebecca. "It's about what happens when people decide to work together for justice." "But you started it all," insisted Emily. "I just opened a box," replied Rebecca. "What made the difference was everyone together." During the program's recording, Rebecca was accompanied by Mr. Howard, Mrs. Dorothy, Attorney Michael, and Jennifer. The blue van was parked outside the studio, now almost 10 years old, but still well maintained. "Mrs. Rebecca," the host asked, "what was the most difficult moment in this whole story?" "It was when I discovered my husband had been deceived too," she replied, "because then it stopped being about money and became about dignity." "And for you, Mr. Howard?" asked the host. "The hardest moment was admitting I was wrong," he answered, "because until then I always made excuses for the things I did." "And what changed?" "I realized excuses didn't change the fact I was harming hard-working people just like me," explained Mr. Howard. "And I realized it was possible to make a living by working honestly." "Mrs. Dorothy, how do you assess your daughter-in-law's transformation?" "I always knew Rebecca had grit," the mother-in-law replied. "What I didn't know was that she had wisdom too." "Wisdom for what?" "To understand that sometimes being strong means forgiving, and sometimes forgiving means demanding changes," explained Mrs. Dorothy. The program aired on a Thursday night and had a major impact. The Justice and Forgiveness group received hundreds of contacts from people interested in creating similar groups in their communities. "Mom," said Brandon, who was now 18 and studying law inspired by Attorney Michael, "I think you started a movement." "I didn't start any movement," protested Rebecca. "I just discovered many people are going through the same problems. But now these people know they're not alone," he said. "And they know there's a way to solve things that doesn't destroy families or communities." That night, Rebecca went for a walk through the neighborhood where it all began. She passed by Mr. Howard's old auto shop, which now had a large sign advertising honest and guaranteed services. She passed by Mrs. Florence's house, who still waved from the window whenever she saw her. She passed by the town square, where she had confronted Mr. Howard for the first time. When she got home, she found the van parked in front of the house under the streetlight. 16 years had passed since she had accepted that rusty van as payment. The vehicle now had some signs of age, but it was still reliable and functional. "Thank you," she murmured, running her hand over the body. "For everything." Emily appeared on the porch, now a 17-year-old young woman. "Mom, who were you talking to?" "To the van," Rebecca answered without embarrassment. "And what did you say to it?" "That I'm grateful it came into our lives," explained Rebecca, "even though it's old and rusty." "It's not old and rusty anymore," said Emily, coming down to stand beside her mother. "No, now it's old and experienced," corrected Rebecca, smiling. "Just like you," teased Emily. "Hey!" protested Rebecca, laughing. They stood there for a few minutes, mother and daughter, looking at the van that had changed their lives. "Mom," Emily finally said. "Yes?" "If you could go back in time and choose not to accept the van, would you?" Rebecca thought about the question. She remembered how desperate she was back then, how humiliated and without options she felt. She remembered the fear of not being able to support her children, the anxiety of not knowing what the future would hold. "No," she finally answered, "because if I hadn't accepted the van, you and your siblings wouldn't have learned that it's possible to face problems without becoming worse people." "What do you mean?" "When we discover someone has done something wrong, it's very easy to want to destroy that person," explained Rebecca. "It's much harder to find a way to achieve justice without destruction. And why is it worth choosing the harder path?" "Because the harder path usually leads to the most beautiful place," answered Rebecca, hugging her daughter. Several months later, Brandon graduated from law school and decided to specialize in community conflict mediation. Tyler, now 16, was taking a technical course in mechanics, inspired both by Mr. Howard's story and by his desire to work with his hands. Emily, at 17, had decided to study social work, wanting to continue the community support work her mother had started. "It seems our van created a family of people who want to help others," observed Mrs. Dorothy during a Sunday lunch. "The van didn't create anything," corrected Rebecca. "The van just revealed what was already inside each of us." "What?" "The desire to do the right thing," she replied, "and the courage to do it even when it's hard." Mr. Howard, who had become a regular visitor at Rebecca's Sunday lunches, added his perspective. You know what amazes me most after all these years? What? Everyone asked. It's that this story could have ended very differently, he said. If Rebecca had chosen to report me instead of giving me a chance to change. How would it have ended? Asked Emily. I would have lost everything, probably gone to jail, my family would have been left in poverty, and the affected customers would never have gotten anything back, explained Mr. Howard. No one would have gained anything. And the way it happened? The way it happened, everyone gained, he said. I learned to be a better person. The customers got their money back, the community became more united, and you discovered you could make a difference in people's lives. And the van got a new life, added Brandon, looking out the window at the vehicle parked outside. That's true, agreed Tyler. It was headed for the scrapyard and became the most famous car in town. That afternoon, after lunch, the group decided to take a ride around the city using the van. It was something they did occasionally, especially when there were visitors who wanted to see the places where the story had happened. First stop, the old auto shop, announced Brandon, who now drove the van on special occasions. They passed by the shop, which now had the name New Life Auto Shop, and a loyal clientele who trusted Mr. Howard's work. Funny, said Emily, this place looks completely different now. That's because it is different, explained Mr. Howard. It's not just the decoration that changed. It's the energy of the place. How so? Before, anyone who came in here always left feeling like they'd been cheated, he explained. Now people leave satisfied. That changes the whole energy of the environment. Second stop, Mrs. Florence's house, announced Brandon. Mrs. Florence, now 80 years old, still lived in the same house and still waved from the window whenever she saw the van pass by. Mrs. Florence, shouted Emily from the van window. The lady appeared on the porch and waved energetically. How's the famous writer? She called out to Rebecca. Famous writer, nothing, replied Rebecca. I'm still the Rebecca of the van. To us, you'll always be the Rebecca of the van, said Mrs. Dorothy, even if you write 1,000 books. Third stop, the square where everything changed, announced Brandon. They parked in the central square, where Rebecca had first confronted Mr. Howard. The place now had a small garden dedicated to community initiatives for social transformation. Look there, said Tyler, pointing to a plaque in the garden. Mom's name is on the plaque. The plaque indeed mentioned Rebecca and the group Justice and Forgiveness as examples of how the community could solve its own problems. I don't like these things, said Rebecca, embarrassed. Why? Asked Emily. Because it gives the impression that I did everything alone, she replied. And you know that wasn't the case. But someone had to take the first step, said Attorney Michael. Michael, who had found the group in the town square. And that someone was you. The first step was accepting the van, corrected Rebecca. And I only did that because I was desperate. So sometimes desperation can be a good thing, observed Jennifer. How so? It forced you to accept something you didn't want, explained Jennifer. And that thing you didn't want changed your life. That's true, agreed Rebecca. If I had other options at that moment, I probably wouldn't have accepted the van. And then none of this would have happened, said Brandon. Exactly, she agreed. Sometimes what seems like the worst option is actually the best opportunity. Last stop, the place where it all began, announced Brandon. They drove to Rebecca's house, which was now well maintained and painted. In the backyard, there was a small recreation area where the Justice and Forgiveness group meetings happened when the weather was good. Look how this house has changed, observed Mr. Howard. The house is the same, said Rebecca. What changed was who lives in it. How so? When I accepted the van, I was a defeated person, she explained, someone who just reacted to things that happened. Today, I know I can influence what happens. That's the biggest change of all, agreed Mrs. Dorothy. While they talked in the backyard, some neighborhood children approached the van as they always did. For them, the blue van was part of the neighborhood scenery, but they knew there was something special about it. Aunt Rebecca, asked one of the children, is it true that your van is magical? Magical how? Asked Rebecca, smiling. My mom said your van solves problems, explained the girl. The van doesn't solve problems, replied Rebecca. People solve problems. Then why does everyone talk about the van? Because the van taught me something important, explained Rebecca, bending down to the child's level. What? It taught me that sometimes the best things come wrapped in a way we don't like, she said, like a gift that's ugly on the outside but beautiful on the inside. And what was the beautiful gift? The chance to discover that I was stronger than I imagined, replied Rebecca. The children were satisfied with the explanation and went back to playing. The group of adults continued talking until late afternoon. Rebecca, said Attorney Michael before leaving, I have news for you. Good or bad? Good, he replied, smiling. The justice and forgiveness model is being studied by a university in New York. They want to turn it into an official methodology for community conflict resolution. What does that mean? It means that what you created here could become public policy, explained Attorney Michael. It could be taught in university courses and officially applied in other cities. Wow, said Rebecca, impressed. You'll be sought after to give lectures, participate in research, maybe even teach at university, continued the attorney. I'm not sure I want all that, said Rebecca hesitantly. Why? Because I'm afraid it will become theory and lose its essence, she explained. What we do here works because it comes from the heart, not from university books. Then it's your responsibility to make sure it doesn't lose its essence, said Mrs. Dorothy. If they want to learn from you, teach them the right way. A few months later, Rebecca really started receiving invitations for lectures and consultations. She decided to accept some, always bringing members of the original group to share their experiences. The most important part, she said during a lecture at a university in Washington, isn't in the documents we found in the van. The most important part is in the decision we made about what to do with those documents. And what was that decision? Asked a professor from the audience. We decided that justice without compassion is revenge, and compassion without justice is negligence, answered Rebecca. So we sought a path that had both. And how did you ensure the agreement would be fulfilled? Through community supervision and total transparency, explained Mr. Howard, who had accompanied Rebecca on the trip. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about the agreement and helped monitor it. And if the person broke the agreement, then the documents would go to the authorities, said Rebecca. But we made that clear from the start. The second chance wasn't a blank check to keep making mistakes. And did it work? It worked because everyone had an interest in making it work, explained Mr. Howard. I wanted to redeem myself, the victims wanted to be compensated, and the community wanted peace. After the lecture, several students approached Rebecca to ask more specific questions. Mrs. Patterson, asked a young law student, weren't you afraid he would run off with the money? I was, Rebecca answered honestly, but I realized fear couldn't stop me from trying to do the right thing. And if it had gone wrong? If it had gone wrong, at least I would have tried, she said. It's better to fail trying to do the right thing than to succeed doing the wrong thing. But how did you know it was the right thing? I didn't, admitted Rebecca. I just felt it was. And when you don't have absolute certainty, sometimes you have to trust your instinct. This answer sparked a long discussion about the role of intuition in conflict resolution, something law books didn't usually address. Back home, Rebecca reflected on how her life had changed. From a humiliated cleaner, she had become a national reference in community conflict resolution. But what impressed her most was how she still felt like the same person inside. Mom, said Emily when they arrived home, do you feel different after all these honors and lectures? No, answered Rebecca. I feel the same, just with more responsibility. What kind of responsibility? The responsibility not to let success make me forget where I came from, she explained. Do you think that can happen? It can, said Rebecca. That's why I always come back home, always go to the group meetings, always ride the van. Is the van important for that? Yes, confirmed Rebecca, because when I get in the van, I remember who I was when I accepted it, and I remember that all the good changes that happened afterward came from simple decisions by ordinary people. That night, Rebecca had trouble sleeping. She kept thinking about all the people she had met during the trips, all the problems she had helped solve, all the communities that had adopted the justice and forgiveness model. She got up and went to the window to look at the van parked on the street. Even in the dark, she could make out its familiar silhouette. "Did you know?" she murmured to the vehicle. "When you arrived here all rusty, did you know all this was going to happen?" Obviously, the van didn't answer, but Rebecca had the impression that there was a silent wisdom in that machine that had endured so many years, so many miles, so many stories. The next morning she received a call that would once again change the course of her life. "Mrs. Patterson?" said a male voice on the other end of the line. "This is Congressman Michael Thompson. I'd very much like to speak with you about a bill we're drafting." "A bill about what?" "About community mediation," explained the congressman. "We want to create a legal framework for initiatives like yours. Can you meet with us in Washington?" Rebecca hesitated. She knew that involvement with politics could complicate things. "Congressman, can I bring my team?" "Of course," he replied. "In fact, that would be better. We want to hear from everyone involved." A week later, Rebecca was in Washington accompanied by Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Howard, Attorney Michael, and Jennifer. The group was welcomed into a room at Congress where several lawmakers wanted to learn details about the experience. "Congressman," began Rebecca, "before we talk about laws, I want to make one thing clear. What we do works precisely because it doesn't depend on law." "How so?" asked one of the congressmen. "It depends on human relationships, trust, mutual understanding," she explained. "If you turn this into bureaucracy, it may lose its essence." "But we need a legal framework to give legal security to the agreements," argued another congressman. "I agree," said Attorney Michael, "but the law has to facilitate, not complicate." The meeting lasted 3 hours with intense debates on how to regulate without stifling, how to provide legal security without bureaucratizing. "What do you suggest?" asked the congressman sponsoring the bill. "We suggest that the law simply recognize the right of communities to create their own conflict resolution methods," said Mrs. Dorothy, surprising everyone with her clarity. "And how to ensure these methods are fair?" "Through transparency and participation," replied Mr. Howard. "If the whole community participates in the decisions, it's unlikely anyone will be unfairly harmed. And if someone doesn't accept the community's decision, then they can appeal to the traditional justice system," said Rebecca. "Community mediation doesn't replace justice. It's an additional alternative." The bill that resulted from these discussions was much simpler than the lawmakers had initially imagined. It basically recognized the right of communities to create their own conflict resolution methods, as long as they were transparent and voluntary. "It's a law that creates space instead of creating rules," explained Attorney Michael when the bill was passed. "And is that good?" "It's great," he replied, "because it allows each community to find its own solutions, tailored to its reality." 2 years later, over 100 American communities had created mediation groups based on the justice and forgiveness model. Each adapted the basic principles to their local reality. "Mom," said Brandon, who now worked advising some of these groups, "do you have any idea what you created?" "I didn't create anything," insisted Rebecca. "I just opened a box." "And what was inside the box changed the country," he said. "What was inside the box was just paper," she corrected. "What changed the country was people's decision to do the right thing with those papers." "It's the same thing," said Brandon. "It's not," insisted Rebecca, "because if other people had found those papers, they could have made completely different decisions." "How so?" "They could have used them to blackmail Mr. Howard. They could have sold the information. They could have simply burned everything and pretended they didn't see it," she explained. "Then what made the difference?" "What always makes the difference," replied Rebecca. "The choices people make when no one is forcing them to choose anything specific." That afternoon, Rebecca decided to do something she hadn't done in a long time. She went out alone to drive the van around the city with no specific destination. She just wanted to drive and think. She passed through the neighborhoods where she had grown up, the streets where she had looked for work in the first months after her widowhood, the places where she had faced so many difficulties. She stopped at a viewpoint high in the city and watched the landscape. From there she could see the neighborhood where she lived, the downtown where she had met Mr. Frank to open the box, the town square where she had confronted Mr. Howard. 22 years, she murmured. calculating the time that had passed since she had accepted the van. It was hard to believe everything that had happened since then. Her children were responsible adults. Her relationship with Mrs. Dorothy had transformed into a deep friendship. Mr. Howard had become an honest man, and she herself had become a national figure. But what moved her most was knowing that this story had multiplied. In hundreds of cities, people were solving problems using principles similar to those she had applied. Justice tempered with compassion, punishment combined with opportunities for redemption, firmness balanced with forgiveness. "Thank you," she said again to the van, as she had done so many times over the years. This time, however, she was certain she was thanking not just the vehicle, but everything it had represented: the courage to accept what seemed undesirable, the curiosity to investigate what seemed mysterious, the wisdom to find creative solutions to complex problems. When she returned home, she found unusual activity on the street. There were parked cars and people chatting animatedly in groups. "What's going on?" she asked Mrs. Helen, who was on the sidewalk. "Rebecca," exclaimed the neighbor, "a television crew has arrived wanting to film your house and your van for a documentary." "A documentary? About stories of social transformation in the country," explained Mrs. Helen. "It seems the van story will be one of the cases studied." Rebecca sighed. She knew media exposure was important to spread the message, but she also cherished the simplicity of her daily life. The television crew was setting up equipment when she arrived. The director, a young and enthusiastic man, immediately approached her. "Mrs. Rebecca," he said, "what an honor to meet you. I'm the director, Tyler Paul, and we're making a documentary about how ordinary people can transform the reality around them." "And why did you choose our story?" "Because it's the most complete story we've found," he explained. "It has a clear beginning, middle, and end, real transformation of several people, and results that can be verified." "And what do you want to film?" "We want to retell the whole story from the beginning," said Tyler Paul. "Film the van, the auto shop, interview everyone involved, show how everything changed." "I'm not sure if that's a good idea," said Rebecca hesitantly. "Why?" "Because I'm afraid it will turn into a spectacle," she explained. "Our story isn't entertainment. It's about real problems of real people." Tyler Paul was thoughtful for a few moments. "You're right," he finally said. "What if we did it differently?" "How so?" "Instead of retelling the story as entertainment, we show how people can apply the same principles in their own situations," he suggested. "That makes more sense," agreed Rebecca. The documentary was filmed over a week, showing not only the original story, but also recent cases of communities that had applied the justice and forgiveness methodology. "The most important part," said Rebecca during one of the interviews, "isn't what happened to us. It's what can happen to other people facing similar situations." "And what can happen?" asked the director. "They can discover they have more power than they imagine," she replied. "They can find out they don't have to choose between accepting injustice and destroying those who committed it." "Is there a third option?" "There's always a third option," confirmed Rebecca. "The problem is that it's usually harder than the two obvious ones, but it's also always more constructive." The documentary was released 6 months later and had a great impact. Not only did it tell Rebecca's story, but it showed how she had inspired transformations in many other communities. "Mom," said Emily, now a social work graduate working in community mediation, "the documentary is being used in colleges as teaching material." "Really? Really?" she confirmed. "Law professors, social work, psychology, public administration, all are using it to show how theory can become practice." "And what do the students think?" "They find it inspiring," said Emily. "Many are doing their final papers on community mediation." "Is that good?" "It's great," Emily replied. "It means the next generation of professionals will know these alternatives from college." Rebecca smiled, pleased to know the story had become a teaching tool. But what made her happiest was knowing the principles were being applied in practical situations, not just studied in theory. A few months later, she received an invitation that moved her deeply. The state university in her city wanted to give her the honorary degree of Doctor of Social Sciences. "But I didn't even finish high school," she protested when Attorney Michael told her about the invitation. Exactly why, he explained. They want to recognize that wisdom doesn't only come from books, it also comes from experience and the courage to apply ethical values in difficult situations. I don't know if I deserve this. Whether you deserve it or not, it will help many people, said Mrs. Dorothy. It will show that ordinary people can make a difference. The ceremony was held in the university's main auditorium, with hundreds of people present. Rebecca was nervous but decided to accept the honor, not for herself, but for what it represented. Presidents, professors, students, she began during her acceptance speech. I'm not here as someone who knows more than you. I'm here as an example that academic knowledge and common wisdom can work together. 23 years ago, I was a desperate widow who accepted an old van because I had no other choice. I didn't know I was also accepting a lesson about how small decisions can have big consequences. The van taught me that sometimes what looks like trash can be treasure, as long as we have the courage to investigate. It taught me that problems can be opportunities, as long as we have the creativity to find solutions. But the most important lesson I learned was that no person is so good they can't make mistakes, and no person is so bad they can't change. That's why justice without compassion is revenge, and compassion without justice is neglect. I hope that you, with all the knowledge you have and will acquire, use that knowledge to build bridges, not walls. To create solutions that bring people together, not divide them. And always remember, you don't need to wait until you have all the knowledge in the world to start making a difference. Sometimes an old van and a mysterious box are enough to change an entire community. The auditorium erupted in applause, but Rebecca knew the real test would be whether those words would inspire concrete actions. After the ceremony, several students approached her to ask questions and share ideas. Mrs. Rebecca asked a young psychology student, "How do we know when it's worth trying to solve a problem instead of just reporting it?" "There's no ready formula," Rebecca replied. "But ask yourselves, is the goal to do justice or to get revenge? If it's to do justice, it's always worth trying a creative solution first. And if the person doesn't want to change, then you report it," she said simply. Giving a chance doesn't mean giving endless chances. "How did you know that Mr. Howard really wanted to change?" "We didn't know," Rebecca admitted. "We bet that he did, and fortunately we were right. And if you had been wrong?" "If we had been wrong, we would have used Plan B," she explained. "What was it?" "Hand over the documents to the police," said Rebecca. "Always have a Plan B." These conversations with students became one of the activities that gave Rebecca the most pleasure. She saw in them the possibility of a new generation of professionals who would combine technical competence with human wisdom. 5 years after the honorary graduation, Rebecca turned 55. To celebrate, the family organized a surprise party in the backyard, inviting all the people who had been part of the journey. "Surprise!" everyone shouted when she arrived home after a justice and forgiveness group meeting. The party was beautiful, with colorful lights hanging from the tree, food tables prepared by the neighbors, and the van parked in the center of the yard, decorated with balloons and banners. "I can't believe you did this," she said, moved. "Mom," said Brandon, now married and a lawyer specializing in mediation, "you deserve much more than this." "It's true," agreed Tyler, who had opened his own auto repair shop based on the principles of honesty he learned from Mr. Howard. "And you have no idea how many people wanted to come but couldn't fit in the backyard," added Emily, who now coordinated mediation groups in several cities. The party lasted late into the night, with music, dancing, and many stories. People who had benefited from the group's work came to thank her in person. Students applying the methodology in other cities came to share their successes. "Mrs. Rebecca," said a young lawyer who had come from New York, "our team resolved 15 family conflict cases this year using your methodology." "And did it work?" "In 13 of the 15 cases, yes," she replied. "The 2 that didn't work were because one party didn't really want to resolve it, just wanted to use the process to buy time." "And what did you do?" "We referred them to the formal justice system," said the lawyer, "but at least we tried mediation first." "That's right," Rebecca approved. "The important thing is to give the opportunity. If the person doesn't take advantage of it, the responsibility is theirs. During the party, Mr. Howard approached Rebecca with an emotional expression. "Rebecca," he said, "there's something I never told you." "What?" "When I hid that box in the van, it wasn't by chance," he admitted. "What do you mean?" "I knew I was in trouble," explained Mr. Howard. "I knew sooner or later someone would discover my scheme, so I hid the documents thinking I could use them to negotiate if someone reported me." "And why did you hide them in the van you gave me?" "Because I thought you would never find them," he said, ashamed. "I thought you'd use the van for a few months and then sell it to some junkyard." Rebecca fell silent, absorbing this information. "Mr. Howard," she finally said, "this means you plan to deceive me once again." "I did plan it," he admitted, "and I deeply regret it. But do you know what else it means?" "What?" "It means that even when you were trying to deceive me, you ended up giving me the tool to achieve justice," said Rebecca, smiling. "It's as if fate used your own cleverness against you." "That's an interesting way to see it," said Mr. Howard, relieved not to be rejected. "It's the only way that makes sense," she replied. "Because if I stay angry at you over an intention that came to nothing, I'll ruin all the good that has happened. You're not angry." "I'm angry at the man you were," said Rebecca, "but I care for the man you've become." "And how do you know I've really changed?" "Because you told me the truth, even when you didn't have to," she answered. "And because for 15 years, you've worked honestly even when no one is watching." This conversation became one of the most meaningful moments of the party. It showed everyone present that true transformation was possible, but required complete honesty with oneself and with others. Later, when the party was ending and the guests began to leave, Rebecca was alone in the backyard with the van. 23 years together, she said, running her hand over the body that now had some signs of wear, but still shone under the party lights. The van had become much more than a means of transportation. It was a symbol, a constant reminder that the most valuable things in life sometimes come disguised as problems. "Thank you for teaching me that it's worth investigating what seems suspicious," she said, "and thank you for showing me that courage isn't about not having fear. It's about doing the right thing even when you're afraid." Emily approached her from inside the house. "Mom, who are you talking to?" "To our van," Rebecca replied without embarrassment. "And what did you say to it?" "I said thank you for everything," said Rebecca, "including the nights it wouldn't start." "Especially for those," Rebecca answered, laughing, "because they forced me to learn basic mechanics. And the scares it gave us on the road." "Those too," said Rebecca, "because they taught me that not everything that breaks down is bad. Sometimes it's just different." "You love this van, don't you, Mum?" "Yes, I do," admitted Rebecca, "but not like you love an object, like you love a friend who was with you through the hard times." "And will it stay with us forever?" "As long as it holds up," said Rebecca, "and when it can't anymore, we'll give it the same care it gave us." "What do you mean?" "We'll make sure it has a proper farewell," explained Rebecca. "We won't abandon it in a junkyard. We'll find a special way to say goodbye. But that will be very sad." "It will be sad, but it will also be beautiful," said Rebecca, "because it will be the right way to thank it for everything it represented." This conversation planted a seed in Emily's mind. In the following months, she began developing a project for when the time came to say goodbye to the van. 2 years later, during a trip to a lecture in another city, the van finally showed signs that it was reaching the end of its useful life. The engine started making worrying noises, and Mr. John, who had become the family's official mechanic, said it would be uneconomical to make the necessary repairs. "How much time does it still have?" asked Rebecca. "A few months, maybe a year if we take good care of it," replied Mr. John, "but it's not worth spending money on repairs. It's better to use the money to buy another car." "So, the time has come," said Rebecca, with a mix of sadness and gratitude. Emily then presented her project. Instead of selling the van to a junkyard, they would turn it into a monument at the community center that had been built in the neighborhood. "A monument?" asked Rebecca. "A van museum," explained Emily, "with the complete story documented, photos, testimonials, and information on how to apply the justice and forgiveness methodology." "But will it just sit there?" "No," said Emily excitedly. "It will be a learning space, school groups can visit, people interested in mediation can learn the full story, and new groups can get inspired. And who will maintain it? The community centre, replied Emily. They loved the idea. They want to make the van the official symbol of mediation work in the city. The idea was unanimously approved by the family and the original group members. Everyone wanted the van to have an ending worthy of its story. The transformation of the van into a museum took 3 months. It was restored externally, painted in its original blue colour, and its interior was adapted to welcome visitors. Panels told the complete story, from the day Rebecca accepted it as payment to the results the methodology had achieved in various cities. "It's perfect," said Brandon when he saw the final result. "It's more than perfect," agreed Tyler. "It's worthy of its story." "And now she's going to keep helping people even without driving," observed Emily. The inauguration of the Van Museum was an event that attracted people from various cities. Local authorities, academics, students, community members, and even some of the people who had applied the methodology in other locations came to the ceremony. "This van," said Rebecca during the inauguration speech, "began its useful life carrying goods. Then it started carrying people. Now it will carry ideas." "Ideas about what?" asked someone from the audience. "About the power each person has to transform their reality," she replied. "About how small decisions can have big consequences, about how it's possible to achieve justice without destroying anyone." "And what's the main message this van represents?" "That it's worth investigating before judging," said Rebecca. "That it's worth trying creative solutions before resorting to extreme ones, and that it's worth believing that people can change when they receive a real opportunity for change." In the months following the inauguration, the Van Museum received hundreds of visitors. Schools brought students to learn about the story, universities organized technical visits, and community groups came seeking inspiration for their own initiatives. "Mom," said Emily during one of the group's monthly meetings, "the van is getting more visitors now than it transported passengers when it was active." "That's because now it's transporting something more important than people," replied Rebecca. "What?" "Hope," she said. "Hope that it's possible to solve problems without creating new ones." 1 year after the museum's inauguration, Rebecca received a letter that moved her deeply. It was from a 12-year-old girl who had visited the van with her school. "Mrs. Rebecca," the letter said, "my name is Ashley, and I came to see your van last month with my school class. The teacher told your story, and I was very impressed. At home, my dad and my uncle have been fighting for years over a piece of land my grandfather left. No one talks to anyone, and this makes the whole family sad. After learning your story, I talked with my mom about trying to resolve this the way you did. Could you help us?" Rebecca showed the letter to the group during the next meeting. "Look at this," she said. "A 12-year-old girl understood what many adults struggle to understand." "What did she understand?" asked Jennifer. "That family problems can also be resolved with justice and forgiveness," replied Rebecca. "And will you help?" "Of course," said Mrs. Dorothy, who at 78 still actively participated in the meetings. "If a child had the courage to ask for help, we have an obligation to try." The case of Ashley's family became one of the most complex the group had ever faced. The fight over the land involved legal, emotional, and financial issues accumulated over decades. "The hardest part," explained Attorney Michael after the first meeting with the family, "isn't the legal issues, it's the accumulated grievances." "How so?" "The land is worth relatively little," he said, "but the two brothers have accumulated so many offenses and resentments that the fight has become about pride, not money." "And how do we solve a pride fight?" "The same way we always do," replied Rebecca, "by creating a situation where everyone can come out with their dignity preserved." The mediation process took 6 months and involved several family meetings. Ashley participated in some of them, always with surprisingly mature contributions for her age. "Uncle Paul and Dad," she said during one of the tensest meetings, "don't you think Grandpa would be sad if he knew that the land he left out of love is causing so much hatred?" The girl's observation created a moment of silence that allowed the two brothers to reflect on what was really at stake. "The girl is right," said Ashley's father finally. "Dad never wanted us to fight over him." "That's true," agreed the uncle. He always said family was more important than anything. From that moment on, the focus of the mediation shifted. Instead of arguing about who had more right to the land, they began discussing how to resolve the issue in a way that honored their father's memory. The solution they found was creative. The two brothers sold the land and used the money to create an education fund for both their children, including Ashley herself. The land became education, and the fight turned into collaboration. "Ashley," said Rebecca after the agreement was reached, "do you know you're the one who resolved this situation?" "I didn't do anything," protested the girl. "Yes, you did," insisted Rebecca. "You had the courage to ask the right question at the right time." "What question?" "You asked what your grandfather would think," explained Rebecca, "and that made everyone remember they were fighting against their own family." "And was that important?" "It was crucial," replied Rebecca, "because sometimes people get so focused on winning a fight that they forget why they started fighting in the first place." Ashley's case became one of Rebecca's favorite examples to demonstrate that age wasn't a limiting factor for applying the principles of community mediation. "If a 12-year-old can understand these concepts," she would say during lectures, "any adult can too. The problem isn't intellectual, it's emotional." "How so?" people often asked. "Children haven't yet learned that some fights have no solution," she explained, "so they look for solutions where adults have already given up looking." This observation led to the creation of a pilot program where children and teenagers were trained as junior mediators to help with family and school conflicts. "The idea is to use children's perspective as a mediation tool," explained Emily, who coordinated the pilot project. "Does that work?" "It works better than we expected," she replied. "Children ask questions adults don't ask because they don't know they shouldn't ask certain things." The program was so successful that several schools in the region adopted the methodology. Children trained in mediation began resolving conflicts in the school environment much more effectively than traditional disciplinary approaches. "What impresses me most," said the principal of one participating school, "is how the children became more empathetic after the training." "Why?" "Because they learned to put themselves in the other person's shoes before judging," she explained. "And that changed how they relate to others in general." Rebecca felt deeply satisfied seeing how the principles she had discovered in the van were being adapted for different contexts and ages. It was as if that small, mysterious box kept opening, revealing new possibilities with each generation. On her 59th birthday, Rebecca received an unexpected honor. City Hall announced that the street where she lived would be renamed Community Mediation Street Rebecca Patterson. "I don't agree with this," she said when she learned of the decision. "Why?" asked her children. "Because it wasn't just me," she insisted. "It was everyone together. And because I don't want people to think community mediation is about one specific person." "But you're the one who started it," argued Brandon. "I started because I was desperate and had no choice," she replied. "Anyone else in the same situation could have done the same thing." "But they didn't," said Emily. "You did." Despite Rebecca's reservations, the ceremony for the new sign's unveiling was held with great community participation. People from various cities came for the event, turning it into a celebration not just of her individual contribution, but of the entire community mediation movement that had spread across the country. "Friends," said Rebecca during her speech at the ceremony, "this sign isn't about me. It's about all of us who believe it's possible to resolve conflicts without creating more conflicts. It's about all of us who prefer building bridges instead of walls. It's about all of us who believe people can change when given opportunity and proper support. When you read this sign in the years to come, remember that community mediation isn't about being nice to those who do wrong. It's about being smart in how we handle the wrong things that happen. And remember too that this street doesn't end here at this block. It continues in every community, where someone chooses courage over fear, creativity over revenge, hope over despair." After the ceremony, there was a big gathering at the Van Museum, which had already become the official meeting point for community mediation events in the city. "Mrs. Patterson," asked a young journalist covering the event, "do you have any regrets about this whole story?" Rebecca thought for a few moments before answering. Yes, I do, she said, surprising everyone. What? I regret taking so long to understand my own worth, she replied. I spent years feeling inferior because I was poor, because I was a widow, because I was just a cleaner. And when did that change? When I discovered that who I was inside mattered more than what I had outside, she explained. The van taught me that value has nothing to do with appearance. How so? The van was ugly and old on the outside, but it had a hidden treasure inside, said Rebecca. I was simple and poor on the outside, but I had courage and determination inside. And does this lesson apply to other people? It applies to everyone, she confirmed, because everyone has something valuable inside. The problem is that not everyone gets the opportunity to discover what it is. How can we create more opportunities for people to discover their worth? By treating all people with respect, regardless of appearance, answered Rebecca, and by offering second chances to those who make mistakes, as long as they show real willingness to change. Are these the basic principles of community mediation? They're the basic principles of human coexistence, she corrected. Community mediation is just a way to apply these principles in an organized manner. 3 years after this interview, when Rebecca turned 62, she decided to gradually reduce her public activities to devote more time to family and the grandchildren who were starting to arrive. "Mom," said Brandon, now a father of twins, "you can't stop completely. Many people still need your work." "They don't need me specifically," she corrected. "They need the work we do, and that work now has a life of its own." "How so?" "There are hundreds of people doing community mediation across the country," explained Rebecca. "There are systematized methodologies, training programs, even university courses on the subject. But you're the original reference. And I'll continue to be," she said, "but as a reference, not as the only option." Rebecca established a routine where she gave a few lectures per year, attended the monthly meetings of the local group, and handled especially complex cases when requested. The rest of the time she dedicated to her grandchildren and a personal project she'd been developing, a memoir about the entire experience. "Why do you want to write about this again?" asked Emily. "I already have the practical manual and several documented interviews." "Because I want to tell the part I never told before," explained Rebecca. "What part?" "The part about the fears, the doubts, the sleepless nights," she said. "Everyone sees the final result, but nobody knows the internal process of making those decisions." "And is that important?" "It's fundamental," replied Rebecca, "because people need to know that it's normal to be afraid when trying to do the right thing. And that courage isn't about not having fear, it's about doing the right thing, despite the fear." The memoir took 2 years to complete and was handwritten in school notebooks at the kitchen table where Rebecca always made her important decisions. The Van That Changed My Life, Memoirs of an Accidental Mediator, was published when she was 64 years old and became an unexpected bestseller. Unlike previous technical materials, this book showed the human and emotional side of the whole experience. "Mom," said Emily after reading the entire book, "I didn't know you had been through so much." "What things?" "The sleepless nights, the fear of making wrong decisions, the uncertainty about how the children would react," listed Emily. "I didn't want to worry you at the time," explained Rebecca. "You were too young to understand, and now that we're adults we understand that you were very brave," said Emily. "I wasn't brave," corrected Rebecca. "I was determined, and there was an important difference between the two." "What?" "Courage is when you're not afraid," she explained. "Determination is when you're afraid, but do it anyway because you know it's necessary." "What were you afraid of, specifically?" "Of being wrong about Mr. Howard," replied Rebecca, "of putting you in danger, of being naive instead of wise." "But it worked out." "It worked out," she agreed. "But I only knew that afterward. At the time, I was betting in the dark." "And what gave you strength to keep betting?" "The certainty that if I didn't try, I'd never know if it was possible," said Rebecca. "And the awareness that if I didn't try, other people would keep getting hurt." This conversation became one of the last major interviews Rebecca gave about her experience. At 65 years old, she decided it was time to let other people carry the work forward. "My time to retire has come, she announced during the annual meeting of the Justice and Forgiveness Group. "But you're still young," protested Jennifer. "I'm young for life," agreed Rebecca. "But I'm too old to be the only reference for a movement that already has a life of its own." "What do you mean?" "You don't need me anymore," she said, looking around the table where more than 20 mediators from different cities were gathered. "You know how to do the work. You have your own experience. You have your own success stories." "But it's good to have you as a reference," said Attorney Michael. "And I'll continue to be," she replied, "but as a historical inspiration, not as an active leader." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that now each of you can be a reference for other people," explained Rebecca. "And that's much better than everyone depending on just one person." Rebecca's retirement was more symbolic than real. She continued living in the same house, continued participating in community activities, continued receiving visitors interested in seeing the Van Museum. But she stopped traveling for lectures and stopped accepting consulting for new groups. "How's retirement treating you?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, who at 85 years old still visited her daughter-in-law regularly. "It's perfect," replied Rebecca. "I finally have time to do the simple things I always enjoyed." "What kind of things?" "Taking care of the garden, cooking for the grandchildren, reading books that have nothing to do with mediation," she listed. "Don't you miss the hustle and bustle?" "No," Rebecca Patterson answered honestly, "because the excitement was about the work, not about me, and the work continues. Only now it's other people doing it." "And that doesn't bother you?" "On the contrary," said Rebecca, "it's exactly what I wanted to happen." One Sunday afternoon, 2 years after her retirement, Rebecca was in the backyard playing with her grandchildren when a new neighbor came over to ask about the history of the museum van. "Mrs. Patterson," the woman asked, "is it true that you found a treasure in an old van?" "I did," Rebecca replied, picking up her 3-year-old granddaughter. "Was it a lot of money?" "It wasn't money," she explained. "It was something much more valuable." "What was it?" "It was the chance to discover that I could make a difference in people's lives," said Rebecca. "And is that worth more than money?" "Infinitely more," she confirmed, "because money runs out. But the satisfaction of having helped someone lasts forever." The neighbor was thoughtful for a few moments. "Mrs. Patterson," she said finally, "I'm going through a family problem and don't know how to solve it. Can you give me some advice?" Rebecca smiled, recognizing the pattern that had repeated itself hundreds of times over the years. "Yes, I can," she said. "But first, tell me, do you want to solve the problem or do you want to win the fight?" "What's the difference?" "If you want to solve the problem, there's always a solution," Rebecca explained. "If you want to win the fight, you might succeed, but the problem might still be there." "I want to solve it," said the neighbor after thinking. "Then let's talk," said Rebecca, pointing to the chairs on the porch. And so, even officially retired, Rebecca continued doing what she had always done, helping people find creative solutions to their conflicts. The difference was that now she did it without rush, without a schedule, just as a wise grandmother sharing her experience with those in need. At 70 years old, when she already had 8 grandchildren and the museum van received thousands of visitors per year, Rebecca was approached by a film production company interested in turning her story into a movie. "I'm not sure it's a good idea," she said during the first meeting. "Why?" asked the director. "Because you'll have to invent drama where there wasn't any," she explained. "Real life doesn't have a movie script. But your story has everything: conflict, suspense, transformation, a happy ending," argued the director. "It does," Rebecca agreed. "But it also has many boring moments, many repetitive conversations, a lot of manual work that isn't interesting for cinema. We can adapt. If you adapt too much, it won't be my story anymore," she said. "It will be a story inspired by my story." "And is that a problem?" "It's only a problem if you make it seem easier than it really was," explained Rebecca, "because then people will think they can solve any problem in 2 hours, just like in the movie." After much discussion, it was agreed that the film would be made as a dramatic documentary, mixing real interviews with reenactments of key moments. Rebecca insisted that the difficulties and uncertainties of the process be shown, not just the successful moments. The film The Justice Van was released 3 years later, and had a major national impact. But what made Rebecca proudest was receiving letters from people who had watched the film and decided to try to resolve their own family or community conflicts. "Mom," said Brandon, showing a stack of mail, "we've received 200 more letters from people who watched the movie. What do they want?" "Some want advice, others want to share their own success stories, others want to form mediation groups in their cities," summarized Brandon. "And did you reply?" "I answered some," he said. "But there are too many. And many are about complex situations that would require more attention." Rebecca realized there was a demand she couldn't meet alone. That's when she came up with the idea of creating a virtual network of mediators. "How would that work?" asked Emily, interested in the project. "A website where people with community problems can connect with volunteer mediators in their area," explained Rebecca. "And where will we find so many mediators?" "In existing groups across the country," she said, "and among people trained in university courses based on our methodology." "Will this work?" "It will work if it's well organized," replied Rebecca, "and if we can maintain the quality of service." The virtual network project took 2 years to develop, with technical support from a technology university and funding from a foundation interested in social innovation. The National Community Mediation Network was launched when Rebecca was 72 years old and quickly became one of the main references in conflict resolution in the country. "Mrs. Patterson," said the Dean of the partner university during the launch, "do you have any idea of the impact your story has created?" "I have an idea," she replied, "but honestly, it was never about the impact. It was about doing the right thing. And what's the difference? When you focus on impact, you might end up doing wrong things to achieve big results," she explained. "When you focus on doing the right thing, the impact happens naturally." "And how does someone know what the right thing is?" "By asking yourself, will this decision help the people involved become better people?" said Rebecca. "If the answer is yes, it's probably the right thing." This phrase became the official motto of the National Community Mediation Network and was printed on all promotional materials. At 75, Rebecca finally considered herself truly retired. The network operated autonomously. Her children were established professionals in the field of mediation, and she could fully dedicate herself to the role she loved most, being a grandmother. "Grandma," asked Pete, her 8-year-old grandson and Brandon's son, "is it true that you found treasure in an old van?" "It's true," she replied, sitting on the same porch where she had made so many important decisions. "Was it a lot of gold?" "It wasn't gold," explained Rebecca. "It was something even more valuable." "What could be more valuable than gold?" "The discovery that all people have the capacity to change for the better," she said, "including you." "Including me, how?" "Including you having the ability to help other people when they have problems," explained Rebecca. "How can I help? I'm just a kid." "By asking the right questions," she replied, "like Ashley did many years ago." "What questions?" "Questions that help people remember what's really important to them," said Rebecca. Pete thought for a few minutes. "Grandma," he finally said, "can I see the museum van?" "Of course," she replied. "Do you want to go now?" "Yes," he said, excited. They walked to the community center, Rebecca leaning on a cane she used only for long walks, Pete skipping beside her like 8-year-old boys do. The museum van was more beautiful than ever. It had been recently renovated and now had a multimedia system that told the story interactively to visitors of all ages. "Wow," said Pete admiringly. "It's much bigger than I imagined." "It is a big van indeed," agreed Rebecca. "It had to be big to carry so much history. Can I go inside?" "Yes, you can," she said. Inside the van, Pete examined all the panels, read all the information, saw all the photos. When he reached the panel explaining how everything had begun, he asked a question that even surprised Rebecca. "Grandma," he said, "do you think if the van hadn't had that hidden compartment, your life would have been different?" "Probably yes," she replied after thinking. "Why?" "Because maybe you would never have discovered you could help people," said Pete. "That's possible," agreed Rebecca. "But it's also possible I would have discovered it another way." "How so?" "Because the ability to help people was already inside me," she explained. The van just created the opportunity for me to discover it. So every person has this ability? Every person, confirmed Rebecca, including you. How can I discover what mine is? By paying attention when someone needs help, she said, and asking yourself, what can I do to help this person? And if I don't know the answer, then you ask the person, replied Rebecca. Sometimes the person themselves knows the solution, they just need someone to listen. This conversation with Pete became one of the last great lessons Rebecca shared about community mediation. She realized she had managed to communicate the essential principles to an 8-year-old child, which meant they truly were simple and universal principles. At 80 years old, Rebecca still lived in the same house, still received occasional visitors interested in her story, still participated in family meetings where important decisions were made together. The museum van had become an official tourist attraction of the town, receiving visitors from across the country and even from abroad. Students from American and European universities came to study the Brazilian model of community mediation. It's funny, she commented to Emily during an afternoon coffee, how something that started so small became so big. Are you referring to the van or the impact? Asked Emily. I'm referring to the decision, replied Rebecca. The decision to accept the van, the decision to open the compartment, the decision to seek a fair solution. They all seem like small decisions when you say it like that. They really were small decisions, said Rebecca, but made at the right moments for the right reasons. What were the right reasons? The desire to do the right thing, even when it was more difficult, she replied, and the refusal to accept that some situations have no solution. Do you think every situation has a solution? I think every situation has at least a better way to be faced, corrected Rebecca. Not always the perfect solution, but always a more constructive way. And how do you recognize what that way is? By asking, will this approach bring the people involved closer or further apart? Will it create more problems or solve the existing ones? Said Rebecca. That's simple. That's simple, she confirmed. Life is complicated, but the basic principles are simple. On her 82nd birthday, the family organized a party that gathered over 300 people at the community center. Mediators from across the country came to pay tribute. Students presented research based on the methodology, and authorities officially recognized her contribution. But the most emotional moment of the party was when Pete, now 15 years old and an active participant in the Young Mediators program, presented his own project. "Grandma," he said during his speech, "you always said what matters isn't the size of the problem, but the creativity of the solution." "That's true," she agreed, curious to see where he was going. "So my school group and I created a project to apply mediation in conflicts between countries," announced Pete. "Between countries?" asked Rebecca, surprised. "It's a simulation project," he explained. "We study real conflicts between countries and try to find solutions based on your principles of justice and forgiveness." "And is it working?" "It is," he replied, excited. "We've already resolved 3 international conflicts that seemed impossible." "What do you mean, resolved?" "Found solutions that preserve everyone's dignity and create mutual benefits," explained Pete. "Of course they're just simulations, but they show it's possible." Rebecca was moved to see her principles being applied on scales she'd never imagined. But what touched her most was realizing the next generations were thinking of even more ambitious solutions. "Pete," she said, "you just gave me the best birthday present possible." "What?" "The certainty that the work will keep evolving even when I'm no longer here," she replied. "You'll always be here," said her grandson. "In the stories we tell, the principles we apply, the solutions we find." "That's true," she agreed. "But now you're going far beyond what I could imagine. Because you taught us there are no limits to what's possible when we work with justice and compassion," said Pete. That night, after the party, Rebecca stayed alone on the porch, looking at the stars. She was thinking about the whole journey that had started with a rusty van and a mysterious box. "Thank you," she murmured, as she had done hundreds of times over the years. This time, however, Her gratitude wasn't just for the van. It was for all the circumstances that had aligned to allow a simple woman to discover she could make a difference in the world. End of story. Tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave sincere words in the comments. Do you believe Rebecca made the right decisions? We love reading your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.